Hello and welcome back to the men's room. Thank you very much for joining us. As always, make sure to follow us on Instagram at Real Men's Room, also on Twitter. We're on Twitter as well, at Real Men's Room for that. And make sure if you're listening to us on YouTube to hit that subscribe button. Today we are bringing you our very first Unsolved Mysteries video. And as always, I'm joined by the brilliant Adam Brown.
Hello.
And the amazing Zach Borrett.
Hello.
So lads, we're kicking off. This is sort of a little bit of your idea, Adam, if you want to introduce what this series is going to be.
Yeah, so the idea of this series, I think we've spoken about it a few times on the men's room, is that there's been certain episodes where we've covered certain conspiracy theories and we've sort of blurred the lines in certain ways. Because I think with our conspiracy episodes, obviously, we're trying to summarize these incredible, sort of quite spooky instances.
Out there-ish.
Yeah, they're very far out and very unusual. And we're trying to summarize them in maybe like 20 minutes. But so many of them are deserving of more time and attention. And we were sort of, I think, looking at the idea of looking at some of the sort of like classic unsolved mysteries that exist in the world as a sort of offshoot of what we were doing with conspiracies. And then obviously in this last week, one of the biggest recent mysteries, obviously that of Madeleine McCann, has suddenly resurged in the news because 2020 wasn't fucking weird enough. So we've been sort of thrown something here where I think it would be amiss almost not to talk about it.
Definitely, yeah. Well, this obviously, while talking about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, this is the biggest missing persons case in terms of attention, in terms of money thrown into it, and also the lack of any evidence whatsoever, any solid evidence whatsoever.
I mean, it is really a mad story, isn't it? Do you actually remember where you was, or not where you was, but do you remember actually hearing about this when you
was in Portugal,
when you were younger?
Yeah, I was in a band.
Oh no, we shouldn't joke. Fuck me, we're 5 minutes in. We're all cracking jokes. No, we don't mean to joke about it. But no, I don't, because we were young, weren't we? The three of us, I think we were about 9 or 10 years old.
I would have been 8.
Yeah, we would have been 8.
7.
But I do vaguely remember it all going down and how hectic it all was. Yeah, I definitely remember the front page and thinking, Jesus.
Yeah, I think the media is what we all remember, the absolute frenzy.
100%.
For sure.
I remember it being all over the TV, on the news. Because I think, like, people say about, like, 9/11 and the amount that was on the TV.
Yeah.
I was too young to remember that, really.
Yeah.
Like, I was like 2, so I don't really recall it. But with Madeleine McCann, I do have a clearer recollection of that being all over the telly and sort of
for weeks
media
on end.
Exposure. Not even weeks, like, you know, that was going on for years, like over a decade at this point.
Yeah.
Just a little interesting statistic that I found doing a bit of research in this. There's 250,000 missing children reports every year in Europe alone. And this is one that has captivated for 13 years now. It has captivated, as you say, the media and the conversation still around it. So let's sort of go into what happened for anyone listening. Just 1 second. Ronnie, shush. Fuck's sake.
If you didn't know, Meg did,
staying in.
smuggling the Cray twins at his house. And Ronnie is totally schizophrenic. Thinks he's a dog.
Oh, fucking hell, Ronnie.
I haven't done anything wrong. Fuck off.
All the time you're talking there, I was like, I'm going to attack him. So yeah, I think before we get into anything else about the case, we do need to talk about what actually happened for anyone that doesn't know the whole circumstances, know the thing that happened. So the McCann family were on holiday in Praia da Luz in Portugal, a little seaside town, resort town, very, very popular. I've been there as a child, actually, similar age. When I was the same age as Madeleine, I think, around like 2 or 3, I was actually...
Fuck off.
Yeah, I've been there with my parents.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a real popular resort for British families. The McCann family made up of Gerry McCann, Kate McCann, mum and dad, Madeleine McCann, the eldest daughter, 3 years old, and then Emily and Sean, twins. They were about 18 months at the time. And it was a middle class kind of holiday. It was on a resort. It was an all inclusive. The two parents very well off, highly regarded. One was a GP, one was a consultant cardiologist, so very well off, and it was a middle class kind of family. The children were left on their own while parents went out to dinner each night at the tapas restaurant. The tapas restaurant was on the apartment complex, only about 50 meters as the crow flies away from the McCann's apartment. This group of friends has now collectively become the Tapas Nine. The Tapas Nine is now made up of, I'll get the names out there so if we reference them, people know who we're talking about. So the Tapas Nine is made up of Gerry McCann, Kate McCann, David Payne, Fiona Payne, Jane Tanner, Russell O'Brien, Matthew Oldfield, Rachel Oldfield, and Diana Webster. On May the 3rd, 2007, at around 10 p.m, 3-year-old daughter Madeleine McCann went missing. About 30 minutes to an hour later, it was reported to the hotel, who reported it to the police. And as we've said, it was an international media frenzy from day one. By 7 a.m. the next day, which was only 9 hours later, the British media were already reporting it.
I think how early they started reporting it is a bit weird. I mean, surely there's so many missing child cases every year for children from the UK or from all around the world. I don't know why this one was so big so quickly within about an hour and a half, it seemed like.
I think it was a combination of factors between that. It was a little British girl.
Yeah.
In Portugal.
And in another country.
In another country, middle class sort of family, and it was just without a trace, I suppose.
I can understand why if I was a parent, why you would jump straight to the media, because you want maximum coverage. I think that's often the problem, because you hear about these missing children cases, but a lot of the time you don't hear about them at all, and it's like they just sort of, for want of a better word, they just get sort of buried. Like you lose sight of them quite quickly. And with Madeleine, it became almost iconic. And I think that was actually quite a good move, because I think you could go to most countries, show that picture, sort of the iconic one of her sort of looking into the camera, and you can see her eye and everything. And I think, probably about, I'd say 8 out of 10 people would identify who that is. They'd be like, oh yeah, that's Madeleine McCann. She's that kid who went missing. Like, I get why you would go down the media storm route, but I think the amount of attention it got was unprecedented, even if you were trying to do that.
Yeah. Every single eye in the media was at Praia de Luz the day after. Like they were, there must have been like 100, 200 reporters right outside the apartment the morning after. I remember when they walked out for their first
press conference.
Press conference. That's it. Yeah.
Picture it in your head.
And there were just so many cameras, weren't there, and so many reporters.
The Netflix documentary captured a lot of that very well. I don't know if you've watched it, the two of you, but
I watched it when it first came out. It's brilliant.
I think it does a good job of treading the line, and
100%.
So it gives you a real good perspective of it, because each time it's like 10 days in, 100 days later, 200 days. It gives you a real time frame of events, and it's really worth watching. So go on.
That was one of the best things about that documentary, is it
gives you a real good idea.
It brilliantly grounds you into the timing of that investigation.
Yeah.
Oh, and it goes into a lot of detail as well. It's a lot of episodes, isn't it? It does drag.
There's about 8 hours, and there's a few episodes where it basically turns into a bit of a travel show about Praia de Luz. It just tells you the history of the area, but I don't know, it's really worth watching. We'll put a link in it below or something. So my first point in this is that I want to talk about the initial story that came out about the disappearance. So I've got a few accounts here. So Trish Cameron, which was Gerry's sister, so Madeleine's aunt, she said that it was one of the very first reports on BBC News. She received a telephone call from Gerry, who was hysterical and crying his eyes out, quoting saying, "They last checked at 9:30 and all the kids were sound asleep. Windows shut, shutters shut. Kate went back at 10 p.m. to check, but the front door was lying open, window tampered with, and shutters jemmied, and Madeleine was missing." Brian O'Leary, Kate's dad, said that Gerry told me that when they went back to the apartment, the shutters were broken, they had been jemmied up, and she was gone. Madeleine's godfather, John Corner, Kate had phoned him in the middle of the night and she just blurted out that Madeleine had been abducted and the shutters had been smashed and Madeleine was missing. It looked as though someone had gone straight past the twins to get her. Jill Renwick, a family friend, I believe. The Tapas 9 had been visiting the children every 30 minutes to check on them. The window had been broken and the shutters jemmied. My point with all of this is the initial account from the McCanns that was given to these 4 people and therefore told to the media was that there was a violent break-in with the shutters forced open with a jemmy. The front door had been locked but was now laying open and that Madeleine had been abducted. However, within 24 hours, that account changed. So Gerry McCann's very first witness statement made on the 4th of May, day after, quoted as saying, during the evening, he and his wife had been checking on the children using a key to open the front door of their apartment. He explained how Kate discovered Madeleine was missing on her 10 p.m. check and how he rushed to the apartment and found the windows to the children's room open, the shutters raised, and the curtains drawn open. No mention of a door lying open. Kate, who was the one to raise the alarm, says the exact same as Gerry about the kids' room, quoted as saying the windows were open, shutters raised, and curtains open, adding that she was certain they were all closed when they left at 8:30 to go to the tapas restaurant. On top of that, the claim of the broken window, raised or jemmied shutter, and open window would be thrown out completely by the Ocean Club manager John Hill, who said that despite a claim from a family friend that the shutters were broken, there was no sign of any break-in whatsoever while the McCanns ate at the tapas restaurant. And later on,
Jesus.
Chief Inspector Oligaro Salsa, the spokesman for the investigation, he told British police that the window had not been tampered with, adding that the mechanism makes them almost impossible to open from the outside. My point with all of this is, within the first couple of days of the investigation, there was already this massive cloud of, so what happened? Why have we got 4 accounts to the British media, having 4 accounts from the McCanns that don't weigh up with actually what happened? Why?
I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head of the biggest. I think probably the thing that has made this case so intriguing is the sort of the greyness of the McCanns as people. Because I think a lot of people, at least from my experience, aren't particularly great fans of the McCanns. And there's a lot of iffiness about them in the sense of their story or if they can be trusted. People sort of make these judgments on them where they're like, not sure if I like them. You know what I mean?
They're not the most likable people. I think we can say that and get. Whenever they're spoken to, they seem quite cold and very, matter of fact, calculated. That might be due to the fact that we have known them since they've lost their 3-year-old daughter. But You're quite right. There's always been this sort of, I don't think that, given the circumstances around the missing child, it doesn't help that they're not the most likable and they're not the most emotive people.
Yeah, that people don't really like to trust them, which is probably why there's been so much of these theories thrown about, because they're just unlikable people in terms of they probably weren't likable before Maddie went missing.
Right.
So I could definitely see them because they were attacked for a long time after this.
For sure.
And whether it was justified or not, we'll never know. But it was bloody horrible what they went through, and then what they went through again with the media.
For sure.
I just can't help but feel sorry for them just a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And then moving on to the 10th of May. So we're still within the they call it like, I can't remember.
The golden hours.
Golden hour of, and that's my other point with this, is that with a missing child case, that first 72 hours is crucial.
The most important.
And to finding them and returning them safely. And the fact that we've got such a differing and sort of like contrived and conflicting version of events everywhere we go.
So a gemmied door. I've never heard the word gemmied before. It's like what, with like a crowbar kind of prying it open
kind of thing. Like forcibly opened up.
Yeah, forced entry.
Yeah, exactly.
Jesus.
So on the 10th of May, the McCanns gave their second statements to the police, and despite Gerry making himself clear about the events, as we've spoken about before, he now claimed that they left their check on the children. They left to go to the restaurant through the unlocked patio door. So the violent break-in now had been sort of proven false. And then there was a documentary that came out in October 2007. It was the Dispatches documentary. And Kate and Gerry made the formal admission that it would have been impossible for someone to break in via the window, snatch Maddie, and leave with no forensics trace.
Wow.
The documentary was really skeptical about the McCann's version of events. It sort of went in skeptically talking about it. And then actually days later, Clarence Mitchell, who was the spokesman for the McCann family, he made the statement reversing the original claims and statements made by friends and family members regarding an alleged break-in, saying that there was no evidence of a break-in. I won't go into detail, but I can say that Kate and Gerry are firmly of the view that someone went into the apartment and took Madeleine out of the window as their means of escape. And to do that, they would not necessarily have to tamper with anything. Now, they want you not only to forget what was said initially and forget the original statement, but now they want you to believe that an intruder walked in via an unlocked door, took Madeleine, and then climbed out of the window as his means of escape.
It's always this kind of thing that is the sort of linchpin in an unsolved mystery, and what makes them so intriguing is the immediate lack of clarity. And this is full of that, where it's like, oh, they said this, oh, but they actually said this. And, you know, because you've also got this media storm of so many people trying to report it and trying to report the latest information, all the reports get iffy and confusing, and trying to find some sort of decisive A to sort of ABC, sort of this happened and this happened and this happened, a proper timeline becomes almost impossible, as as the McCanns do, sort of report and say different things pretty much at the drop of a hat. Like every other time someone asks them, they change their story.
They've made it harder for themselves, or they did make it harder for themselves.
Exactly. And that's the weirdest thing about it, is that you can look at this case and think how awful for the parents that, you know, you can be of the opinion that a child did go missing that night and the parents look guilty, but maybe they're just guilty of neglecting to properly look after their child and leaving them alone and to be kidnapped.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't help their case when you've been questioned and you've given one version of events, and you've been questioned days later and given a totally different version of events. And then, you know, there's that very popular article that goes around of the 40 odd questions that Kate McCann just didn't answer.
Yeah.
She had no comment to about 40 questions regarding.
I think it's 48. It's nearly 50
questions. it's things like that when you say, Adam, that they're not the most likable people, yeah, they're not helping themselves. You know, these are, no, I can't really say it like that, but you should be desperate to try and help find your daughter.
Yeah, I think you've sort of hit something else there, which is with the conflicting stories, there's multiple elements that could be to do with that. It could be that, you know, in an intense situation, and for a deeply traumatic situation, I think that your brain can sort of spot things and misremember things, and your brain can fill the gaps which maybe weren't necessarily there. And I wonder potentially if the reason that their stories were so muddled is because they were still just trying to process it. They were like, "Oh my God, someone must have broken it. They must have got in through the window. That must have been how they did it." And then they sort of think about it and go, "Oh, maybe they didn't. No, they must have. How else would they have got in?" You can sort of see how.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that's possible. How they were just so like caught up in whatever at the time. They were just, "Oh, they've taken her through the window. Oh my God, someone's broken in the window and taken her." So it's like stuff like that. It's like I can definitely see what you mean there.
Yeah, you can read it as that. You can read it as they've perceived it as this one thing, that their trauma has morphed it into something else. Or alternatively, you can see it as they're trying to create an atmosphere of confusion because they may or may not have had a greater involvement than they're willing to admit, and they've gone, "Oh, it's
the scale is ridiculous."
Oh, it's that like it could be all manner of things. And I think for a lot of people, I think it's difficult, especially if you're not a parent, or, you know, like if you've not been in an environment like, maybe if you've even if you've not had younger siblings, that kind of stuff. It's hard to put yourself in their shoes and imagine, right, I've had my child taken. And it's like, you sort of say, "Oh, I would handle it like this and that." But you don't know. It's such a horrific and hopefully a rare situation that you won't have to face, that you can't really frame it realistically and of yourself.
No.
It's difficult to sort of put yourself.
No one knows how to react when they lose their daughter. Like, even if you think you do, or if you think your brain is wired to react well to something like that, yeah, you're never gonna like replicate that feeling of what McCann's went through.
Also, on top of that is that, and it leads into your point a little bit, Zach, in that Kate and Gerry McCann had real issues with the police force in Portugal. And I think the police force in Portugal had issues with the McCanns as well. So, you know, we're saying that it doesn't help their case that they, you know, come across as, you know, negative or a bit cold.
There was often language barriers, wasn't there?
Huge language barriers. And I think that the PJ, the police judicia, PJ went into it thinking, right, you've had something to do with this. And I think they butt heads very early on, and that has led to a little bit of friction there when I think that took over a little bit. I don't know, you go into talking a bit more about the police act?
Yeah, I've just got just a list of their mistakes, really.
Through this case?
Yeah, through this case, not in like general. I'll go through it now. It's a long list, boys, but at the end of it, we'll summarise. Right. It was widely acknowledged that mistakes were made during the so-called golden hours soon after the disappearance. Neither border nor marine police were given descriptions of Madeleine for many hours, and officers did not make house-to-house searches. Roadblocks were put in place at 10 a.m. the next morning, leaving 12 hours for anyone to escape the country. Police did not request motorway surveillance pictures of leaving Praia de Luz that night of the disappearance, or of the road between Lagos and Villarreal de Santo Antonio on the Spanish border. Euroscut, the company that manages the road, says they were not approached for information by the police. It took Interpol 5 days to issue a global missing person release. They were like the international police. Interpol, that's what they do. They're like police for the whole world. I don't really know how to explain it. Hundreds of holiday makers later came out and said that police had not spoken to them at all throughout that time. The crime scene was not secured, police took samples from Madeleine's bedroom, which were sent to 3 different forensic labs in Portugal. It was reported on the 1st of June 2007, 29 days after the disappearance, that DNA from one stranger had been found, but around 20 people had entered apartment 5A before it was closed off, meaning kind of nothing. An officer placed tape across the doorway of the child's bedroom, but left at 3 a.m. without securing the apartment. Could not wrap my head around that one. Apartment 5A was empty for a month after the disappearance, then was let out to tourists before being once again sealed off in August 2007 for more forensic tests. 2 more. Police allowed a crowd to gather by the front of 5A not long after the disappearance, including next to the children's bedroom window, through where an abductor would have entered or left, of course, destroying any evidence. And finally, an officer dusted the bedroom's windows exterior shutter for fingerprints without wearing gloves or other protective clothing. You sick freak. Thoughts?
Me. I mean, yeah, I'd heard some of those before, but when you think about it, you know, it's very easy to look at this case and think, it's easy to overlook all of that. And you do have to remember that this is a tiny little seaside village in Portugal.
Very easy that you can close it off. Like it's just like in the matter of an hour or 2, you could easily shut that whole place down, search everywhere. Do you know what I mean? It's not like New York.
On a day-to-day business as usual type scenario, this police force probably is dealing with, I've lost my cat.
Yeah,
or
that's true.
I've lost my wallet. I left it in my front room. That kind of thing. So when you it's a little bit, I don't know how much you know about the Amanda Knox case. It's a bit. It's a similar sort of story to that, in that you've got a tiny little village somewhere. That happened in Perugia in Italy, and it was like a double murder, I think it was. A tiny little village that is not used to that kind of scale of events, not equipped for it, and you know they shouldn't make these mistakes. And those things that you've said there, they're very easily avoided if you just take a minute to think about what you're doing. But the scale of this was just so off the charts that they were not prepared for it. And
it is like Clacton having like a triple murder case.
Yeah, it's just they're just not built for it and not used to it, that kind of police force. And like you say about the apartment being, I remember reading somewhere that they didn't treat it as we need to look for evidence and all of that. They didn't really treat it as a crime scene, because the as soon as the police got there, they were like, right, the parents have done something here, rightly or wrongly. Wrongly, because you should I mean, that's their job to investigate every area. But I think that is a reason why they didn't do anything crime scene-y, or we need to look for an intruder here, because they straight away went in and was like, there's no way there's an intruder coming here.
But that's just negligence from the get-go, isn't it?
One of the details that you mentioned there, Zach, sort of caught my attention. You were saying that there were no roadblocks put in place for, do you say 12 hours?
10 a.m. the next day, they put them in.
Fuck me.
Because that was
How
the thing
ridiculous.
that, because one of the things of Portugal is that it has such a huge amount of borders. You can easily get to Spain from there. You can get to Morocco quite easily. It's somewhere that's very easily connected. So in that space of time, you could be across Europe in that sort of time. You could be on a boat somewhere with Madeleine in a fucking zip bag or something. No one would even know the wiser. You know, you could be well on. Like, people just wouldn't know by that point.
There was virtually no point of closing them if they were going to do it at 10 a.m. Because obviously the person that would have taken it would have escaped straight away.
Yeah, they wouldn't have just wasted any time. If they were going somewhere, they would have gone. And they would have gone quickly. It's something that really sort of caught my eye, because there's so many theories as to what happened, and I think it's kind of intriguing to sort of go into them. Like, I think like we said earlier on, I know Greg mentioned it, with the idea that the Portuguese police immediately thought something was up with the McCanns. Do you want to jump into that?
Yeah, go for it, man.
Because I think
it's important to say that the three of us, when we're having this discussion, as is presented to us, really. We've got our opinions at the end, but anything that comes up in theories and discussion is we're presenting it as is.
Yeah, we're just presenting what's already out there, essentially.
What's out there? Yeah, exactly.
What we've read.
We'll conclude
Making it
at the end.
bite-sized and reiterating information that's, public knowledge, essentially.
Sure.
It's all available online. It's not like we've got some crazy scoop or anything. But, I think the theory that something happened and that the McCanns potentially were responsible, in theory, for something like Maddie actually dying, I think is kind of intriguing. The idea that maybe they did something that then caused Maddie to die, and then they had to scramble together some sort of cover up, I think was something that sort of always caught my attention. That theory basically being is that because both of them were in a medical profession, the idea being that Kate, with her knowledge of anaesthetics, would be anaesthetizing the children to get them to go to sleep when they wanted to go out, which I think is a pretty far out idea anyway. But the idea that maybe there was a possible overdose that then resulted in Maddie dying, and then them all sort of scrambling to cover it up.
On the note of seduction, can I go, Greg?
Sedation, not seduction.
Seduction, sorry. on the point of sedation, just reading something here over breakfast, the morning of the disappearance, Maddie had asked Kate and Gerry why they weren't there the night before, and she'd cried that night. So maybe there was maybe anaesthetics involved that night to stop the crying, maybe the night before.
There's a really, really just quick remark I want to make on that. There's a brilliant, we'll link it in the description. There's a brilliant, it's about 2.5 hours, but it's this expert witness statement interview analysis. And he's basically spent about 30 years in police interviews behind the screen, listening to what they're saying. And within minutes, he can decide if they've committed the crime or if they've had some involvement and things like that. So he's a real expert at this. He finds that statement that McCann's made about them saying that Madeleine said, "Why didn't you come when Sean and Amelie were crying?" It was something like that, wasn't it? Now, he made the point that as a 3-year-old, as a child, you're in your first reaction, you're selfish as a child. So it would be, "Why didn't you come when I was crying?" Not when they were coming. So he was sort of, it's a really good 2.5 hour video of him really going through a particular interview they did and just debunking all things that they say, little indicators that it's not quite as it seems. It's weird, that kind of thing with the sedation theory. Kate McCann is the one that originally suggested that sedatives might have been used by the abductor. She was one of the first people to suggest that as a theory, which is bizarre. Yeah,
very bizarre.
I mean, you could read into that a few ways, couldn't you? Because it could be that's because it's her expertise. Maybe she goes, "Oh, well, I've worked with this sort of thing before. Maybe it's that." Or
there's that.
It could be that, potentially.
Yep, for sure.
I think it's an interesting theory that somehow the kid died. I know there was talk of there being like a sort of like a bloodhound that sniffed out something in their car, and there was some talk of that.
We'll get to that after. That's like the accidental death theory. I've got a load more on the sedation theory if you want me to lead on that.
Okay, go for it. Go for it.
So Kate McCann was one of the first people to suggest that sedatives had been used, saying that it was, quote, possible that the abductor administered sedatives. And going back to that night of the disappearance, Kate's account of that first night in her book, she talks about how her reaction to finding Madeleine gone, how she yelled, was banging her fists, hitting at things and screaming. Bear in mind that Madeleine shared a bedroom with the two twins, about 1.5 years old. You would think that all of that would wake the children up. However, all of the other accounts from the 9:30 and Kate herself said that the twins slept soundly, and it was Fiona, I think, Fiona Payne, that actually had to test it. She said that Kate tested to see if the children were awake or test if they were under sedation or even alive. She put a hand on their back to check for breathing.
Mm.
So it's bizarre that basically it gives a little bit of credence to the sedation theory that they would sedate all three of them to get them to bed quicker so they could go out and have an evening. Because it's weird. Think all of that banging about, all of that commotion, all 9 of them went in and out of that room. That's why the crime scene was contaminated, because there was so much movement. And yet you've got these 2 1.5-year-old twins sleeping soundly to the extent that Kate has to check that they're actually breathing.
When they
that's
supposedly cried the night before.
When they
From
supposedly
absolutely
cried
no
the night
noise.
before. Exactly.
If we take what supposedly Madeleine said the night before, then those kids were up and crying and not being funny. Like, my niece is coming up for 1 year old, and I know that like they still have issues with her going to bed. She'll still be up at silly times or be crying at like 4 a.m, that kind of thing. Like, they're still dealing with stuff like that. Admittedly, that's a little bit younger, but not by a lot. That's by like, I don't know, like 6 months, something like that. It's barely anything. So it's like,
it's the same sort of stage as on infancy as they were, of course. The head of the Portuguese investigation, Goncalo Amaral, who I think is worth a discussion in himself. He's been highly critical of McCann's throughout. He said,
is he the one that wrote the book?
Yeah, he wrote the book.
Yeah.
And he said that there was absolutely no doubt in his mind that the children were sedated.
Wow.
Right, okay, so on the 10th of August, Kate contacted the PJ and requested that the twins were tested for traces of sedation. And it's reported that she was on her own during that phone call to the police, and she sounded upset. Gerry McCann called that same afternoon and cancelled the request. And Gerry's firmly denied any claims around the use of sedatives, calling them ludicrous. I don't know if you've seen that interview where the Portuguese interviewer asks if they used cowpole or anything. And
the lady?
And he gives the least convincing answer ever. So you've got a conflict there in that Kate is the one that suggested sedatives been used. She made the call to get the twins tested just in case, but then Gerry firmly denies all of them and cancelled the request. On the 24th of September, so bear in mind she went missing on the 3rd of May, 24th September, the McCanns undertook their own private sampling test. And by this time, sedatives would have long left the body. Sedatives can take between 6 hours and 200 hours to leave the body because they stay in hair, they stay in, all of that. They're both doctors. Kate is an anaesthetist. They would fucking know that.
Definitely.
It's a very strange thing. I get that, if you're in that sort of strange space where they would have been in, of like somewhere between grief and, almost in limbo, I get why you might start clinging to any sort of ridiculous piece of evidence. I understand that. And I think especially in a situation where there is seemingly no evidence, it's utterly clueless, why you would start going to sort of quite extensive leaps to try and find something. I get that, but at the same time, it's been that. What would that have been? August. That's like 3 months, 3 or 4 months since the actual abduction. There wouldn't be anything there, and it does feel like maybe they did anaesthetize their children, and then they're maybe trying to acknowledge that, but also cover it. It's very strange. It's a really iffy detail.
Well, the thing is that you could look at this both ways. You could look at it and go, right, if they know that if the twins get tested for sedatives, then the police, and it comes back positive, then the police know that the McCanns did sedate their children to get them to sleep. And if that's the extent of it, that is pretty awful. I mean, Kate, depending on the sedatives used, Kate could have lost her license, could have lost her job, would look really bad. On top of that, you could look at it opens the door of, oh, okay, so they sedated them. Madeleine could have been overdosed. She could have been drowsy, fallen and hit her head, all of that kind of thing. You can look at it both ways, of course. What doesn't help is that Kate McCann, in her book, wrote about this, and she said that, quote, hair samples produced negative results, and went on to say that, and this is a direct quote, while this didn't totally exclude the possibility that the children had been sedated, it meant nobody else could prove otherwise.
Fucking hell.
Could prove otherwise. Why?
I know there's a few strange things in that book, isn't there? There's some very odd details.
I want to preface this. I don't want to come across as I'm attacking the McCanns and blaming the blame on them. But why would you appear defensive? Why would you come out and say, well, you can't prove otherwise, if you're just trying to find your daughter?
That really is like, it's the first form of like chatting shit, isn't it?
It's
where you become very defensive. That's one of the first signs. And yeah, to see them get so defensive again, obviously we're not in the position of them, you know, obviously they probably don't get any sleep. They're probably very stressed. They probably are getting annoyed at and defensive at things they might not normally do because their daughter's missing. They must be running on like 2 hours sleep max a night, which does have its toll. Obviously, again, I'm not sticking up for them or anything. It's just, you never know with these stories because you don't know what it's like to lose a daughter.
It could be because obviously the Portuguese police have been kind of set on this idea that they're behind it, that they would feel defensive. And
Yeah.
I can understand why there would be a defensive mentality. Well, you can't prove it, so fucking shut up. Like, I can get why they would go down that route, but at the same time, doesn't look good. Like,
it's not great.
It's not a great look. Not at all.
And I briefly mentioned it there. Of course, there's another theory about the accidental death theory, or the freak accident. And this is, we've mentioned that the PJ originally thought this is what happened. And investigator Tavares de Almeida, he concluded in his report that Madeleine died in the apartment that night, the night that she was reported missing, stating that, quote, there seems to be no strong indication that the child's death was anything other than the result of a tragic accident. Evidence for this theory, and I think this is strong evidence, is the dog searches.
Which ironically are the only things that can't be used in evidence.
Yeah,
as
I know.
actual evidence,
I didn't know
annoying.
that before watching the documentary. I didn't know that dog
Nor did I.
evidence can't be submitted. So they put 2 dogs. I loved the dogs, by the way. Sweet little
Brilliant.
cadaver dog, Eddie, and the blood dog. The cadaver dog, which looks for scents of corpse and rotting bodies, found the scent of a corpse odor in 12 places associated with the McCanns. And there was a mix of the inside the apartment. I believe it was in the wardrobe and behind the settee. In the McCann's rental car, which the McCanns rented 25 days after the disappearance, and also on Kate McCann's clothes. And the blood dog found the scent of blood and bodily fluids on 5 of those 12 locations. Let me just say 4 words for you, okay? Dogs don't fucking lie. The dog isn't going into this with any other thought of, if I do my job, I get a treat. And even then, because people look at the blood dog evidence and go, well, of course it's going to find something, it gets a treat. They give it a treat regardless. They give it a treat if it finds something or doesn't. It just knows that if I bark, if I get something like this, I've done my job. It doesn't go into it thinking, oh, I don't know, I might have it doesn't have an opinion on the McCanns.
These fuckers didn't pet me. They're dead.
Yeah.
But that's not how that's happened.
I mean, sorry if I sound harsh, but dogs don't fucking lie.
The only thing I would say, like, because I was reading about the dog evidence, and I think they've said that it's not a wholly accurate process, that there is something like, there's quite there's about a 30% margin of error, 30-40%.
I remember seeing in the documentary they debunked it, didn't they? Or not debunked it.
So it was
they brought up-
contaminated. So that it might have been Maddie's blood.
That was it. Yeah.
I completely concede that. But fuck me, we're talking
Is
about
that all they said
good.
in the documentary about that? Like, that it only might have been her blood.
Yeah, that's basically the conclusion. But fuck me, we're talking about making a good impression and not looking good, mate.
Yeah, that doesn't bode well, does it?
Not at all.
I think that is one of the ones where it is quite a shocking idea. So I think it's quite. It also connects quite well with the idea that maybe Maddie was anaesthetised, that she could have potentially fallen, hurt herself, cracked the head open on something, or like because of that, either it was an overdose that then killed her, or she tripped, she fell, she cut herself on something. Kids are clumsy. I mean, fucking adults are clumsy. Like, it doesn't take a lot to imagine that a 3-year-old with free reign of a small hotel could probably injure themselves.
Well, one of the big theories is that Kate and Gerry. Okay, maybe they didn't have an active role in Maddie's death. Let's look at if she died that night. They went out at 8:30 and they were doing the regular checks. If Maddie is sedated, if she wakes up and she's drowsy and looks for her parents, goes to look out of the window, because the settee, the window was just behind it. So if she stands up on the settee, trying to look out the window, trying to find mummy and daddy, falls back, hits her head. Say that happens at 9:30 or something, and the parents maybe weren't doing a check. I mean, after a couple of glasses of wine, maybe they thought they'll be okay for another half an hour. They went back and find the body. Rigor mortis could have set in, and an autopsy would have known that. And the question would have been asked.
They would have been held responsible.
The question would have been asked: why is there signs of her dying 3 hours before the body was discovered and you came in? Then they would go to prison for neglect, and I don't know what degree of manslaughter that would be. I don't know really particularly, but they would, leave 2 children, very well paid jobs, and be disgraced. So there's that incentive. Of course, that's all hypothesizing, and that's relying on a lot of different things to fall into place. But that does sort of give incentive if all of that were to be the case.
Yeah, so the idea being there is that to avoid a manslaughter claim, that they sort of incur this massive conspiracy.
Right.
They go, right, well, no, she didn't. It was a prancing paedophile took our daughter. Like that sort of turns into this great thing that then, I think, because of the media frenzy, becomes completely impenetrable, and then it gets massively out of hand.
Definitely, yeah.
So that's,
I think it's
quite an interesting theory.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and because that is with, not to try and get onto conspiracy theories too much, but that is sort of the way that people look at conspiracy theories to go, all right, well, why would the McCanns do this? Why would the McCanns cover up their death? Why would they do that? In those moments, you can get not speaking from experience, of course, fucking out myself as a murderer on a podcast.
When I'm busy murdering people.
In those moments, it's very easy to go very selfish and think, right, okay, if we go to prison, what's happening to the kids? But I don't know if it's selfish really, but it's that kind of thought process of it's better to live with the guilt of hiding and stuff like that rather than the children.
Yeah, the lesser of two evils.
Right, that kind of thing.
100%. I think that's very probable, especially with their past in medicine. The kids being the other 2 kids, being sound asleep the whole night. It just really, that's probably the most believable in terms of like all the theories that have been put forward, I think.
For sure. And throughout the years, this is 13 years ago now.
Jesus, it's so long ago.
There's been a handful of good leads, really. There's a handful less than that. I mean, we've got obviously the sketches of Have you seen this man? We've got Jane Tanner.
Yeah, I remember that picture of the sketch of like they found like a slumped girl in that was the Jane Tanner one, wasn't it? Yeah, and I think that guy came forward years later and said he was carrying a child.
Yeah,
but why would has he not owned a TV for fucking 8 years? I think he came out really late.
I looked into the Jane Tanner sighting actually, because I think was it? I think it was in the initial Portuguese investigation. It was looked at as being this sort of crucial detail, and I remember it. I remember seeing that illustration of the man with the long hair carrying the little girl. I remember seeing those illustrations for years. Like I remember seeing that. But I think even at the time, it was fairly quickly sort of there was someone who matched that description who sort of went, I was taking my daughter home. I think I matched that slightly. Maybe they saw me. And I think in 2011, when Scotland Yard opened their own inquiry into it, they clocked it was a red herring and it was a complete like non-detail. But you can see why it would be gravitated to so drastically. Because I think that's the thing, you have to remember the sort of geography of the environment of this sort of this area is that there are a lot of holiday makers and a lot of them have got kids. So you've only got to see one person with a little blonde girl around the same age, and if you don't get a good enough look and you're looking for that, your brain's going to go, oh my god, they've got magic.
It does just show the unprofessionalism of how the police handled it when as soon as the British police in 2011 took over, they were like, yeah, red herring straight away. That's complete bollocks. Why would you ever even put that out there for years? And that was one of the main pictures. Just shows, doesn't it?
Do you
totally
remember
understand why they would magnetize to it, but it was quickly disproved.
Do you remember very, very close to the beginning of all of this, the Portuguese police released the like artist impressions drawing of one of the suspects, and it was literally like an egg with a bit of hair on it.
Yeah.
You remember that? That was genuinely released as like, have you seen this man?
We think it may have been Buck who did the kidnapping. It's like,
yeah. So that sort of does prove your point of the fuck me. It was a little bit, it was a sort of.
I think it might have been because that was almost the only distinct character. Because it was quite a distinct look. Had this sort of like a long sort of look. To be frank, the guy looked a little bit like John Wick. Like with the hair, like you could all like there's a distinctness to that person straight away.
Yeah.
Whereas of every other sort of possible character in the case, they're all kind of they all look a little bit invisible almost. They're sort of like nondescript. They're like a textbook human. They're like a bit nothing.
For sure. And also I think it's important to remember, like you said about Zach, that it took him years to come forward. I think that one of the biggest issues with this case, and one of the reasons that there's been such a lack of evidence and people come forward, is that I think the British media straight away, the minute there was anything to jump on, they straight away, like with that character drawing, it was, I think the headline was something like Maddie's kidnapper revealed, or like it was straight away like
front page, wasn't it?
Front page, trying to grab your attention. So if you are that bloke and you know that you're in that position, you're in that time, and that is genuinely your daughter, you've got nothing wrong, you would be slightly terrified to come forward because what are they going to print about me?
You're immediately, I think, especially now, and it was at that strange transitional point with Madeleine, is it was that little period when the world was starting to get a lot more internet savvy, and it was that sort of era of, well, if you do something, the internet doesn't forget it. You're constantly enveloped in it. Like it was getting to that point. And I think
this case was just before Twitter came out.
Yeah, this was like on the cusp of the way the media is handled massively changing. And I mean, we've sort of talked about it a little bit recently when we did the review of Quiz, which you should check out, by the way. If you look at that, you can see the sort of media hounding, and that was like a good 4 or 5 years before. Like it was crazy the amount of attention that was drawn to them over a bloody game show. So even if you are a fairly sort of auxiliary part of that story, as that guy was, or maybe might have realised he was, you can understand why you would go, yeah, fuck that. Like, I'm not touching that with a fucking barge pole. Like, I can totally get why you would want to steer as clear as possible. Because if you go, oh yeah, I'm so and so. By the way, I was a Madeleine McCann fucking suspect. How you doing? People are going to be like, ugh.
Yeah, because if it's just a drawing and no name, you can just leave it and go, right, I'll come out in 6-7 years and say that.
You can preserve your anonymity and
exactly
obscurity, and I think that's what that guy did, and I can't blame him, especially if he has got a child, which obviously he did. You would go, yeah, I'm not exposing my child to such a fucking crazy media frenzy.
Especially after seeing what happened with Robert Murat, the actual first suspect. That was in this case. He was wrongly accused of it, and he received 600 grand in out of court settlements.
I think he should have got double that.
But at the time, it was the largest number of, like, it was like the biggest payout ever in regards to one issue.
So basically, Robert Murat was a guy that lived in Praia de Luz at the time. He just lived with his mother. I think he was in property, something like that. Funny little bloke. And he had a dodgy eye. He was blind in one eye. And basically...
Bit of a weird-looking bloke.
Yeah. But he got involved in the case because I think that there's people out there in this world that when bad things happen, they sort of want to be... They want to be the savior. They want to help. They want to straight away. It's like, I can help in this. I can do that.
It's cringy as fuck.
For better or worse, whatever. But he acted as sort of translator for the McCanns because he was fluent in English and Portuguese, and he acted as a translator. And basically, he got very close to the case, and the British media sort of looked at him and went, "He's got a funny eye, must be it." And he was ruined. He got like I think his house was raided about 4 times. And you just have to think that relates back to the PJ's utter incompetence in that, why you have to raid it once and you like, forgot to check under the sofa, right, raid it again. Get that done in one, and that should be able to prove
I left my keys in there, mate. I need to go back.
Right. Who was the murderer that they always compared him to? They said he had vibes of like a guy that murdered 2 kids.
So a woman basically came out and said he's got Ian Huntley vibes.
That's it.
And that was the thing that nailed him. Because Ian Huntley is a bloke that he was the first person. These 2 girls went missing, and he was the first person to be interviewed and said how awful it is and all of that. But he was actually the one that killed them.
He was on the news.
The
night getting interviewed. I think he offered to be interviewed.
Yeah.
And he was acting as if it was so awful when and he would do a lot what Murat would do, like help in the case, walk around, try and help. So this woman was always on TV.
So this woman comes out of nowhere and fucking ruins Robert Murat's life by basically going on the news and saying, I don't know, he's got Ian Huntley vibes. Probably never even met Ian Huntley. Probably had nothing to do with it. But just by saying those few words, the British media straight away thought, right, well, we can't let that happen again. He must have done it. We've got to get him now.
That's disgusting.
So it's such
absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, exactly. So, going back to that point as well about people probably not wanting to come forward, even if they've got a little bit of information, because you can see what happened to Robert Murat.
Yeah, I do sort of remember this guy now from the documentary. Like, he did sort of get lumped in quite unfairly. For sure.
There was a bit. There was something weird with him, wasn't there? Where he refused to answer a few questions about what went on his computer. Was it?
No. So basically, he had there was a bloke living in Praia da Luz, a Russian guy who was a web designer, and
He was a giant spider.
exactly. He was designing a website for Robert Murat, and they had a phone call, I think the night of Madeleine's disappearance, and it was late at night, I think. And the police looked at that and thought, that is weird. Why are you? Because I don't think they had an intimate relationship. It was just that he was doing some work for Robert Murat, and there's. It's a fishy one because the guy is interviewed in the documentary, but he doesn't talk about this element too much. Because I think that the PJ took his hard drives, and I think they found child pornography. And the guy's no, maybe not child pornography. I think it was just pornography. I think, and the guy's defense was basically, I deal with a lot of clients. That's clients' computers, things like that. And in the documentary, he didn't really prove his innocence in any way. He was just like, I'm not going to talk about that kind of thing.
Yeah, that was an awkward moment.
It was awkward
because he was seen as like such a good guy. Like, this guy is innocent, like from start to finish. And then I'm pretty sure it was late on when he started getting a bit weird about them questions. I don't really remember it properly, but yeah, that was a bit of an awkward bit.
Yeah, it was awkward. I just want to touch on Kate and Gerry McCann a little bit more. We've obviously mentioned them a fair bit throughout this, but just to give them their own sort of section. Obviously, they were very highly regarded in the medical world. One of them a GP, one of them consultant cardiologist. And I particularly have problems with Gerry, personally. I don't know if you picked up on that through the podcast.
I caught a faint look of it.
I've got real problems with Gerry because he seems like an exceptionally cold and sort of controlling. He likes to be in control of any situation. I think he controls Kate to an extent. And something I wanted to note is that in the first interviews after Madeleine's disappearance with the PJ, Gerry was interviewed alone. However, when it came to Kate's interview, Gerry and his advisors insisted that he sat behind Kate while she was having her interview, which is very, very unusual, almost unheard of. And Kate, in her book, said that every so often Gerry would reach over and put his hand on her shoulder and give her a sort of reassuring squeeze. See, I don't want to seem like I'm finding things to pin on them, but you could read that as he is very controlling, he has set a narrative, and he's absolutely making sure that Kate, the more vulnerable, the weaker one, sticks to it a little bit. You know what I mean?
Or Kate may be the weaker one that might be taking the daughter's disappearance maybe a bit worse. Yeah. Like, I think they went into this in the doc as well. How she was a lot weaker than him in terms of just like mental strength in general.
Yeah.
Not because of like guilt or anything.
Yeah.
But maybe that's like the reason for the squeezes, or it is hard to just to think these normal, like a reassuring squeeze could genuinely just mean a reassuring squeeze.
Absolutely. It really could. They could be a lovely couple that love each other, but just, didn't handle.
Been read in a lot of different ways.
Stuff
like that.
100%.
I just wanted to put it out there, really. And I've got some of Gerry's statements that have been taken since the disappearance. I'm going to read them all to you, and then I want you to see if you've picked up on the strange bits that I've picked up on. See if we match notes.
Okay.
So here's one. We had very clear objectives of what we wanted, and any parents would take the opportunity of trying to get information into the investigation. That's one. Second one, there is no evidence that Madeleine is dead, and there is no evidence to implicate us in her death. Third one, everything we've done in the last 100 days is focused on the belief that Madeleine was alive when she was abducted. And then this, of course, is the Calpol exchange with the interviewer. The interviewer said, "That evening, did you give your kids Calpol to help them sleep?" Gerry's response was, "We're not going to comment on anything, but, there's absolutely no way we used any sedative drugs or anything like that." In one interview, one rather exceptional interview that you can find online, the interviewer says, "When you heard the police had found blood in the apartment, how did you react?" Gerry held his hands up, said, "You know what?" Takes his mic off. "This is all investigation and you need to speak to the police." He stood up. His PR assistant was saying, "Gerry, just. Gerry said, "All your questions are about the investigation and I can't comment on that." PR woman says, "Gerry, just sit." Gerry says, "No, we can't answer questions like that." And the PR woman says, "They know that. They just want you to say it's speculation."
Jeez.
There's some very strange things. As I say, in the description, we'll put a link to a 2.5 hour analysis of their interview.
So that sedative drug one, so the question was, that evening did you give Calpol to help them sleep? And at the end of his answer was, no way we use any sedative drug or anything like that.
He says, we're not going to comment on anything, but, there's absolutely no way we used any sedative drugs or anything like that.
After a question about Calpol.
Watch the actual interview, and he does that sort of chuckling, nervous laugh, itches his ear. It's a really uncomfortable interview to watch, but it's the qualifiers. I'm not in any way a speech analyst.
Have you seen speech analysis on something like this? I think there was a case in the UK
I've watched a lot of things like that,
which is the woman's pet, the girl's parents that did it, or her stepdad, and he was interviewed a lot on TV. And he was saying stuff like, there is no evidence that Madeleine's dead. And this is just something he similarly said. When Gerry said there's no evidence Madeleine's dead and there is no evidence to implicate us in her death, very similar things were said from the people that are clearly behind that in these shows I've watched in terms of like psychology.
There's never one tell of he's lying. There's never one single tell, but there are many different factors that can suggest deception. It's all about deception and a narrative, because our words betray us, in a sense. Not to get too psychological, I'm not trained in anything like that, but I've watched a lot of things like this. And it's things like when he says, "We had very clear objectives." In a nutshell, that is, so you've got a plan, you've got a motive here. Then he says about focused on the belief that Madeleine was alive. It's putting things like implicate us in her death. It's all these phrases that when you, in a longer form, that it's not a good look.
They're bringing up things that weren't brung up.
Yeah.
Like stuff like that. It is just a tell sign of deception.
Yeah.
All them Gerry quotes are ridiculous.
The quotes are interesting. I think for me, there's a few things that could be going on. Again, like, I know you're I think it's fair to say you're a little bit anti Gerry in some capacity.
A little bit.
You've got a sort of perception of him as this quite malicious figure. And I totally can see why you would read it that way. But for me, like with anything like this, I'm always a little bit wary of going too far one way. I'm not a fence sitter necessarily, but I prefer to have a full perspective. And with this guy, all of that can be read as a few things. It could be that, he is from an educated clinical background, and the way he talks about it, to me, jumped out as being very clinical. The way he talks about certain details, to me, came across like that. And it could simply be that he's trying to be as sort of by the book, sort of on paper, and as technical about it as possible, which can be a problem because people can view that as him being a bit cold and a little bit sort of robotic. But it might be simply the best way for someone like him to deal with it, because it's very easy to get up in the emotion of it and be like, someone took my child, and be very, I don't know why they would go Shakespearean, but being very fired up. Like, you can see why someone would be in a state like that, where they would try and just be like, what do we actually know? Let's break down the facts. What are we trying to achieve? I can get why you would go methodical and try and make sense out of something that is utterly horrendous to be in.
Absolutely.
But you could kind of read it as that. And I can also see why, if you were constantly being interviewed and being asked details that maybe you weren't totally privy to and were a little bit unaware of, that you would eventually get a bit pissed off and maybe lose your cool a little bit. I can see why, if interviewers were going, what did you think about the blood then? That you'd just be like, fuck's sake, I don't know. But
especially with the lack of sleep they're probably getting.
Yeah, they probably got like that barrage constantly. There probably wasn't even an escape from it. So I get why you'd end up in a state where you'd be like, what are you trying to get out of me? Like, I can get why eventually your patience would be broken by stuff like that.
On top of that as well, I totally concede that they'll never get that measure right. I don't think anyone in the public media could, because to being too clinical, you can look at them and go, they're too cold, they've killed her. If they were too emotional, if they were crying the whole time, you think that's too much.
Yeah, they're bullshitting. They killed her. Like,
I totally concede that. It's just because I've done, probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, I did my dissertation on conspiracy theories and I wrote about this. So I've done probably about 30 hours or so of research into this. And so this isn't based on 20 minutes research into them. I've sort of looked at Gerry and I've sort of gauged that I don't like him. I don't like how he comes across. And, you know, whether that means that he's guilty or innocent, I don't know, of course. But there's just little things that along the way you look at it, the more you look into it, it's not a good look. That's sort of my summation on anything that they've done, really, is it's not a good look. I think we'll conclude this with the reason that it's really the reason that we've
spoke about this today.
It's the reason we've spoken about this and brought it up and researched it, is that there has been a massive development in the Madeleine McCann case 13 years after she initially went missing. And in Germany, they have identified a new prime suspect. They're calling him a prime suspect, and they've named him Christian B for legal reasons. They can't name him fully. But his image is plastered everywhere, all over the world. Don't know how that's going to help him. So he's a 43-year-old German man, currently in prison in Braunschweig, Germany. And he's a bastard, basically. He's a known career criminal, is what they call him. And he committed his first sex crime at the age of 17 in 1994. He's had a total of 17 convictions relating to child sex offences, drug, rape, and child pornography. And he's currently serving time in prison for the rape of a 72-year-old American in the Algarve in 2005. So that gives you a bit of a colour of him.
Fucking hell.
Yeah.
That man is a bastard.
He's just a predator.
Yeah, exactly, a predator. He's currently appealing against a rape conviction, but he is also serving a sentence for supplying drugs. And he's had previous theft and child abuse convictions, child pornography in his possession. And yeah, he is known to have filmed these acts.
Fucking hell.
Filmed and torture of people that he's tied up. And the big link between him and Madeleine McCann is that he was living in Praia de Luz when Madeleine McCann disappeared.
A camper van.
Yeah, he lived in a camper van. And of the night of her disappearance, there was a 30-minute phone call that the suspect made, Christian B, between 7:30 and 8:02 p.m. And German police are treating it as a murder inquiry. And they're saying that they have evidence that that she's murdered, but they don't have enough evidence to convict him.
I don't understand that at all.
It sounds to me, I was reading it, I was thinking, right, okay, what could that mean? And it could mean, reading that, if you had any information, if you read that, you'd think, right, the jig is up, I might as well just come clean. So it could be a little bit of a tactic of, we know this has happened, but we're not going to tell you what. So people are worrying, and if anyone else was involved, hopefully they'll come forward and own up to it. So we said that he owned a camper van that was in Praia de Luz days before the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. He owned a shack 2 miles away from the resort that the McCanns were at, and he had a house in a nearby town. He's also been linked to a Jaguar XJR6, which had a German license plate, which had been seen in the area of Praia de Luz between 2006 and 2007. However, on May the 4th, 2007, the day after Madeleine disappeared, the registration for the car was swapped. Put into a Thompson.
That bit got me when I was reading up on it.
That's really weird.
It's weird, yeah. There's these little things that are popping up. He's also been linked to 3 other missing children cases. Renee Haas, 6-year-old, I think she's been, in German media, they refer to her as the German Madeleine McCann.
Okay.
She went missing from a family beach holiday in the Algarve in 96, close to where Christian B was living at the time. Inga Gertrig, 5-year-old.
Sort of cases before. It's interesting.
Inga Gertrig, I don't know if I've spelled that right, 5-year-old vanished from a barbecue in Saxony-Anhalt in May 2015, close to where Christian B was living. And there's another one in Brussels that her body was found in a canal, Carolina Tits, and I think he was living in that area as well. So either all of this stuff follows him around, or he's got an active involvement.
Yeah, it's a bit of a stretch but where he goes, coincidentally, children go missing.
Yeah, a convicted paedophile and rapist.
Yeah.
Being followed around by these missing children cases.
In 2015, he took over a kiosk in Braunschweig and was working there. And his colleagues have since been interviewed. And apparently, when the staff were talking about the Madeleine McCann disappearance, he got, he quote, freaked out and yelled, quote, "The child is dead and that's a good thing." He said
what
that...
the fuck?
So a barmaid that was working there said that he completely freaked out when we were sitting talking about the case. He wanted us to stop. He cried out, "The child is dead now and that's a good thing." Then he said, "You can make a body disappear quickly. Pigs also eat human flesh."
Fucking hell.
Yeah. And
arrest this man.
And I don't think that this is confirmed, but he's known to have boasted about his convictions and boasted about things he's done, and that's sort of how they got the tip off about him. People, I think it's speculated that he was boasting about having some involvement in all of this, and that's where they got the tip off. He has been linked with this case beforehand, so he's a new name in the prime suspect arena, but within the case, he's known for being involved. And the German Federal Police Office say that the McCann's apartment may have been randomly targeted by Christian B. And, he broke in looking to steal, because he was a burglar as well, of course. The theory is that he went in to burgle the apartment and, it moved into a sexual
got a bit too carried away,
quote unquote, and took Madeleine. So I suppose the only thing waiting is apparently he's not cooperating with the police very well. I don't think that he's talking to them or revealing anything, but any day now, all it could take is a confession from him, or as the German police say that they've got evidence. They are treating this now, sadly, as a murder rather than a disappearance. The McCanns are hopeful, of course, that they find her alive, but the Germans have proof of murder allegedly. So,
and you'd think with such a massive story, if anyone did abduct her, I would have thought, this obviously not meaning to sound awful or anything, I'm guessing they probably would have killed her very soon after this got out, because if she would have been seen by anyone, that she was the most known kid in the world by far. So I'm guessing if she wasn't been abducted, I don't think she would have been alive for that long, which is actually a good thing.
Well, I think that that is one of the theories, isn't it? That going back to the police, I think that they, in the very beginning of the case, they released the image of Madeleine's eye, didn't they? They said a huge campaign about how she had a very distinctive eye, and the police straight away came out and were like, that is only going to spook the kidnapper, if there is one. So
exactly,
yeah, but it's, I don't know, it's an interesting lead. It definitely is, and there's no. I don't mean to say I hope that is the case, but from all what we've said, you do hope that the family, if they weren't involved, get some closure. Really.
Yeah, that would be good, and I think they're on their way to it, because this German police story in one is more evidence and more kind of concrete shit than
we've had in 13 years.
Exactly.
It's definitely the strongest lead. It's the fact that he was in the area. He has a history of this. He's been in similar areas where this kind of thing has happened.
There's definitely, I think the idea that Madeleine McCann, that case was actually some part of a wider sort of serial criminal, is quite compelling. I think that makes it it adds to it, certainly. The idea that she was just some, because it's very unusual. I think that was always the thing that helped the Madeleine case maintain such a fascination for people, was the fact that it just seemed so random that someone would just randomly take this child, seemingly with no real precedent. But the idea that actually, this has happened before, and all these cases might be linked by this one linchpin, this one person, it seems to immediately start, things start to fall into place the moment you sort of look at it that way, almost.
Yeah, 100%. Especially reading that the number plate thing, that his number plate, he changed his number plate the day after she went missing. That gave me goosebumps. I don't know why, when I first saw it on the news, but I was like, shit, this is like the biggest gain of this story since it started. Like, there was so many vague things to say about this, and even in the papers there wasn't any really facts. It was just all speculation for 13 years basically.
He immediately feels more viable than any other
100%
candidate or suspect.
100%.
No, yeah, definitely. I think that it will give the McCanns a lot of closure if this guy, if he does know something, then it would be a shame if it was a false hope situation. It would be a shame that if he was just a bastard in the area, and
it's not unheard of for things like that to happen. To be honest,
not at all.
Of course, yeah.
I think it would be a real shame if it was, and this does sometimes happen, where criminals do it, where they'll go, "Well, I was involved in that. I did this thing as well," and they might not have, but they sort of throw their name in the hat to get a bit more cred. But I don't think it would make sense to do that with Madeleine.
So I think we should end our first Unsolved Mystery episode, and I think we should maybe lay out based on what we've talked about here, what we think could have happened. So Adam, I don't know if you want to give what you reckon.
Yeah, I'll go for it.
If you have a theory at all, of course.
My theory is it was aliens. No, I'm kidding. I think with this case, up until quite recently, it's quite understandable why people would go, it was actually the McCanns who did it. It was their sort of play. They created this great conspiracy to sort of snuff out any sort of culpability on it. And I can see why people would buy into that, but I don't think that's true. And I think now the idea that someone, not necessarily that it was particularly planned, but they took the child and they sort of disappeared, and it was almost, for them, it was just a passing moment, but then just suddenly got all this traction almost miraculously, is, to me, I think, quite likely. But I can see, like with anything, I don't always like mentioning David Icke, because I find him a bit of a polarizing figure. But that little bit that he said about every leg having an Achilles heel, I think that is quite a sort of apt quote with this case, is that there are so many little details that you can read into and go, what the fuck's going on here? And you can see why people find, I think people can look at the McCann case and find basically whatever they want in it. But I think the idea that someone just got snatched and then maybe the McCanns unfortunately didn't present themselves in the best way has created this air of conspiracy around it. I think the lack of leads created that. But yeah, I hope that this German suspect, whoever he may be, brings at least some further light to it, or potentially actual closure.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that, Adam, in terms of kind of on not on the parents' side, but kind of saying they've just lost a kid. Like, we don't know what they're feeling. I don't like it's journalists' job to make them like react like that in front of the camera. It's their whole job to do that. Like, you don't know how you're going to react in that sort of situation. I think I really do hope. I know that sounds awful, but I do hope it wasn't the parents and it was an abduction. You know what I mean? Because that would be, and I'm pretty sure I'm sure it's not the parents after watching, because the Madeleine McCann documentary really did they were proper for the parents, weren't they? Even though they didn't come out for an interview at all. They bashed the documentary, I think, even though it was fully on the McCann side. Yeah. So I think it was a rush of blood from someone that burgled the house. I think he obviously, the person went in there and went for a burgle, had a rush of blood, obviously being the man he is, and I think he must have saw the absolute media frenzy, and panicked, and I guess got rid of her. That's my summary.
I think I hope I'm wrong. I will say that I do hope I'm wrong, but I think that Madeleine died that night. I think that Kate and Gerry weren't responsible. I think that it was an accident. It wasn't planned or intentional, but I think that they covered it up in a way. I think I do hope I'm wrong, but I think that there's just too many little bits that don't quite fit into she went missing without a trace, and we don't know how or why or what, and no one's come forward with anything. But I want to read to you I mentioned it earlier. Peter Hyatt is the name of the statement analysis, and he watched the interview in 2011 with the McCanns. Watch the whole video because he goes into a proper detail. It's 2.5 hours long, but it's an interesting watch if you're interested in this. And he believes, just from an interview, he gets the opinion that Madeleine is dead. Her death wasn't intentional. The McCanns disposed of the remains in a hidden manner, and they're confident that it won't be found. The cause of death may have included Maddie to be very sleepy and have a fall. they have fears of being accused. He believes that the time frame needs to be questioned more and that there's a strong possibility of sexual abuse. That's something that we've not got onto in this podcast purely because we didn't really want to talk about it too much. But, you know, I feel like the parents could just have the guilt of neglecting their children and allowing Maddie to be taken by leaving the apartment. But I definitely think that there's guilt there, and I think that there's more to the story, and I think one way or another we will find out soon.
I think we will, 100%. I think we will get to the bottom, and not we individually, as a collective.
Go to Portugal.
Yeah, but I think the truth will come out very soon. I reckon, hopefully.
But that concludes the first of our Unsolved Mysteries episodes. How do you think it went, lads?
Amazing.
It went pretty well.
Great.
There's so many out.
Yeah, no, definitely. Let us know in the comments if you enjoyed this. What are your opinions? What do you think? Of course, do more research on this if it interests you. We'll leave some links in the description below. And make sure to subscribe to us, of course. Subscribe, hit the bell notifications. We will carry on with this series of...
Yeah, one thing I would add to that as well, actually, is if anyone has got any sort of mysteries that they want spoken about, then comment, let us know, and we'll look into it.
Definitely. I think we've all loved researching this and talking about it and dissecting it.
Class.
This
is a brilliant case, isn't it?
Yeah, we've all been fascinated by this case, and this is something that really intrigues us, looking at unsolved mysteries. So as Adam says, if there is anything you want us to look at, please do let us know. Until next time, thank you very much for joining us in the men's room. Adam, thank you very much for taking part.
No problem. Anytime.
Zach, thank you very much for being here.
No worries.
Good stuff. As I say, until next time, make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Real Men's Room. That's all from us. I'll catch you later.
So long.
Bye.